You're listening to the Anxious Scholar Podcast, a podcast for anxious scholars. If you're a high school student who can't wait to go to university, but also is kind of overwhelmed with lots of unanswered questions like me, then you've definitely come to the right place. On this podcast, I sit down with EGM alumni while they share valuable advice from this exciting journey of theirs that we have yet to take. I really hope you'll enjoy this episode and learn lots of useful information about the college application process, unis, and higher education in general. Hello, Danielle. Thank you for agreeing to do this interview. It's great to have you on the podcast. And thank you for welcoming here in Oxford at Hertford College. Before we start, I was wondering if you could say a few words about yourself, where you were born, what languages you speak, what SPE you took, and what your current academic situation is.
Of course. So, first of all, thank you so much for having taken the time to come physically to Oxford and to set this up. I'm Daniel Escartin-Bustan. I'm Promo 2022 in EJM. I was born and raised in Paris, but my parents are from Spain and Israel. My SPE were math, physics, chemistry, and SOS, so economics. And yeah, I'm doing economics and management. I'm in my second year of undergrad in Oxford University.
Well, thank you for this introduction. I was wondering if Oxford was the only university you applied to, since a lot of students from UGM that I met only applied to Oxford and maybe some programs in France. Could you tell us a little bit more about this? Maybe if you applied to other countries also?
Yeah, of course. On my UCAS, which is the UK admission system, I only applied to Oxford, but I also applied to France, to most of the prépa. And I also applied to 5 universities in the US.
And for the universities in the US, did you take the SAT? Did you prepare for that?
Yeah, for US, I did the SAT the summer, like just before, which is the last SAT available. I only did one SAT and I got 1540. I prepared mostly through Khan Academy and doing past papers.
Very impressive for a last-minute preparation. And what about France? Where did you apply in France?
In France, I applied quite broadly, but in particular prépa. I did a lot of prépa MPSE, so math, physics, and also a lot of prépa commerce, so ECG. If I was not in Oxford, I would probably be in Ginette or Henri IV or Louis le Grand. And yeah, I did both aspects.
And it wasn't a problem that you dropped a physics chimie in order to do a scientific prépa like in
It was a problem. My teacher told me, my math and physics teacher told me that it's not worth applying to MPSE, to math prépa, because I didn't have physics and that I would be like automatically rejected, which turned out to be true for a few prépa. But for some Persian prépa, I was able to get in despite not having physics.
And for America, if you don't mind sharing, was it for the same kind of program that you applied to, and what universities you applied to?
Yeah, for US, I applied, like very cliche answer, but Caltech, MIT, Stanford, Harvard, and Princeton. I applied math and economics or math and computer science, and yeah.
And if you don't mind saying, did you get what universities you got in the US?
Oh yeah, sorry. I don't think I did the US process well, and so I got response from Oxford in early January, and from that I had to give answer and I withdrew, but I don't think I would have been successful in most of them.
Well, it worked out great now. So, but overall, when would you say you like started thinking about university and like preparing your college applications?
Yeah, I started very late, and my advice would be to start earlier to at least think about it. I started thinking about it in June of première, which is very late. And I actually did some work over the summer and the bulk of the work in September, October, November, December of Terminal, which is application season.
And what would you say influenced your decision to apply to Oxford rather than Cambridge?
Okay, now that I'm here, I can say that there's 95% overlap between the two, and I'm happy to discuss about that. When I was choosing between the two universities, I'm doing economics and management at Oxford, which is a program that was not available in Cambridge. Cambridge equivalent of this is just pure economics. In theory, I'm a very mathematical person, and Cambridge in general, but also that program was more mathematical, so like the logical choice was to go to Cambridge. But I liked the fact that you have the management and business aspect of the course, even though that's not what I'm specializing in. I'm happy that I at least had some of it and not just 3 years of theoretical math and applied to economics. That's probably the main thing that I looked at. Also, I think in terms of admission rates, I followed admission rates as an indicator of how good the course was, which I don't think from retrospect was a good idea. So for reference, the economics and management one is about 5%, and for Cambridge it was around 10 or 12%, I don't remember the statistic, but I just assumed from that there would be a difference, but from now looking back that was not true, and so yeah.
So you thought since it was there was like more competition, it would be like a better course.
That was like my vague guess. Yeah, but that's not the only reason I applied. But that's something that was in the back of my mind, I guess.
And after all, you were ready for management because you had done the SES space until terminal, which was kind of the more like management aspect of it, I guess.
I think the thing with SES is that it has no overlap with what you do in economics or even in management, but most notably in economics in the UK or in the US. It's somewhat useful if you're preparing prépa, but there's very little overlap between SOS economics and UK or US university economics.
And what were like the kind of subject requirements that they either like recommended or you had to take in order to take the economics and management?
For economics and management at Oxford, there's one requirement, which is math, spécialité maths for French bac people, and having math HL for IB people. That's the only requirement. They don't require economics. If you have economics or something like that, it helps in that it demonstrates a level of interest, but that is not a requirement at all. The only requirement is having math, and the implied requirement is that you also have further math or some equivalent of that.
And did you do that, for example, Math Expert?
Yeah, I did. I was doing Spé Math and Math Expert.
Okay.
Yeah.
So choosing between Oxford and Cambridge was only one of the choices, but then you had to choose a college within Oxford, or did you do that, or did you do the open application?
Yeah, so when you apply to Cambridge or Oxford, you don't apply to the university, you apply to a college in the university. So I applied to Hartford College in Oxford University and I got in. Sometimes you apply to a college and they like your profile, but they don't have enough spaces for you, so they will put you in a pool and you'll be sent to another college. What motivated me in that, I have to say that I did not understand the system well when applying, and because you have like 30 colleges to choose from, and it's very hard when you're an international to know what's the difference, and there's not that many resources available. Main thing that made me choose it was the fact that it was very good for economics. Historically, it has the biggest economics and management group of any college in the university, and on the academic side it was quite good. And also, like, now that I'm here, the atmosphere is extremely nice, I'd say, on average in the college.
It was very recommended by students, Oxford students, to not do the open application because, like you said, it's important to choose what you would actually, like to live in and be in the environment. And then, in worst case scenario, they would always, suggest another college maybe. So it's better than to do open application.
I don't think there's a major strategic advantage or disadvantage to choosing the college. some colleges have a bit more applications than others, but they are generally structured in a way that there's a lot of checks and balances, so that there's little ways to like do strategic choices like the ones you mentioned. I would recommend just looking over the colleges and choosing one that you like, but I don't think there's a strategic advantage except for a few specific colleges.
And in terms of admission requirements, obviously academics is a very important part of it, if not the most important, and you must have noticed that, especially in comparison to like the admission process in the US, which is also involves more extracurricular activities. So you had perfect grades. You ended terminal with a 18.92 average. So I was wondering what requirements you had to meet in terms of grades for your course, and yeah, can you give us an idea of the grades that you needed?
Okay. Short answer is it largely depends on your course. On average, the more selective the course in the UK in general, the higher the grade requirement. And also sometimes they worry about your grade in a specific subject. I'd say economics and management is, in terms of admissions, it's one of the most selective courses with computer science in the university. So it's like one of the ones with the highest grade requirements, and you essentially need like minimum of 17, I'd say, if you're on the French back, 17 out of 20. All my IB friends in the course have 45, 44, like minimum of 42. You probably have a shot if you have 40 or 41, but yeah, in terms of what you would want, you probably need a 42 or more minimum in IB and a 17 or more in the French bac.
And in terms of your math and SOS bac, what grades did you get?
I got 20 in math and I got 18 on the SOS bac.
Okay. Which is the economics, just for
people
the
who economics,
because it's there's a lot of acronyms. So you also received the GEM awards for most of the time that you could have received for 3 years, right?
I think, yeah.
Yeah. What do you think helped you manage to achieve this academic kind of excellence, we would say?
I think the number one thing that I'd say is not the work I did at home, but rather the work I did in the classroom. There's always people that work more than you at home, and there's always that person that you think you'll never catch up to. My main piece of advice is to never leave a classroom having something that you've not understood. So that implies asking a lot of questions. Don't be like annoying in the class, obviously, but asking a lot of questions, and if needed, talking to the professor at the end of the session. But you learn more asking a question and talking with your professor for 5 minutes and clarifying everything and leaving the classroom only once you've understood stuff than spending 2 hours alone at night in your room trying to understand the same concept. Is my main advice.
And the teachers were always, there to answer your questions, and it was never too much.
Professors are happy when you ask questions. Often the problem is that there's not enough interest. They come to a classroom of people who are chatting and not interested, tired, not doing the work. If they have a motivated student that asks questions and that is actually interested and wants to learn, they will be happy to not only answer your questions but take some time to help you, because they don't always have that.
And is this the case for high school and the teachers in
yeah, I was referring mostly to high school. It remains true in university, but the system is different. But that's high school advice.
Okay. And I would say the kind of second requirement, well, there's many, but there's also the additional exams that you had to take. For you was the TSA, the Thinking Skills Assessment. Could you tell us a little bit about what it is and how you prepared for it and maybe when you started?
Yeah. Thinking Skills Assessment is a test used by Oxford for 3 courses to my knowledge, maybe more. 1 being Economics and Management, 2 being PPE, so Philosophy, Politics and Economics, number 3 being Geography, I think. And for each it's graded out of 100. For each course, there's an unofficial minimum number that you want to reach. For Economics and Management, it was like 70, 72-ish that you want to aim for. For the other two, it was slightly less, about 60s. What it is, it has 50 questions over an hour and a half. So you essentially have a minute and a half per question, something like that. Two sections. One is critical thinking, and the second one is problem solving. Critical thinking would be like, here's a text, what's an underlying assumption of the text, and you have like 4 options. Or here's a text, what's the main conclusion, or which most resembles the logic in this assessment, in this phrase. The problem solving is any type of problems, and like it's impossible to summarize because there's literally any problem you can imagine. It's mostly about your ability to think fast and improvise on the spot.
Is there a way you could prepare for like past papers, or did you have a textbook, or I don't know, a tutor maybe?
Yeah, I never had any tutors like in general. So the way I prepared it is very simple. I just looked at the 20 past papers and did them all. But I did them like diligently, in that every time I would do a paper, I would, after I've done it, I would correct it and look at my mistakes I have, but also do some form of mapping of the mistakes I have. So for example, if I had 8 mistakes, I would look at whether I have most of them in problem solving or in critical thinking. And among critical thinking, is there one type of problem I always get right or I always get wrong? And doing that over 20 past papers, at the end you know that main conclusion questions I can do in 30 seconds. These ones I need 2 minutes, these ones, etc. And it's not just about doing paper after paper after paper, it's doing paper after paper, and from there deducing what you're good at.
Being strategic about it, yeah. And of course there's also the personal statement. Do you have any advice to offer students when choosing maybe a topic or a style of writing, any specific aspects that they should highlight?
In terms of general structure, I think the general structure of some form of introduction, where you introduce yourself, then some big body paragraph or paragraphs on like why you want to do this course, and a final paragraph on other stuff outside of that subject that you do, I think is a general structure that works well. The way most people start is like, oh, hi, I'm Bob, I'm from Singapore and I do this. What I went for was, which I don't know if it was a good idea or not, but I guess it worked, was starting with a series of questions that I had that were economics related, and then I like vaguely introduced myself, and to highlight that I'm curious and that I look at the world around me, especially with economics, that's what you want to try to prove. I look at the world around me, I ask questions, and then I elaborated in my core and my body paragraphs about like why I want to pursue that, what I want, what I'm most interested in, etc. In terms of advice on the thing that people generally struggle the most with from experience is why this course, especially when you have a broad course, like if you're applying to math, why math? Because there's obvious reasons for like I'm analytical and I like solving problems, but every single applicant against you will have that. What I did, for example, for economics, like everyone says I want to understand the economic principles underlying society, which is like a fair reason. But what I went for was choosing 2 subcategories of economics. In my case, it was mathematical economics and behavioral economics, so economics and psychology, and doing a deep dive into those 2 subsections of the area because I had stuff to say about it. And from there, I was able to show that there's specific areas in which I'm interested, which I guess worked well in illustrating that in general I'm interested in economics. So being specific and is probably my most significant piece of advice for personal statements. And it's don't feel like if you're applying biomedical sciences and you choose 2 micro areas of biomedical sciences that you're super interested in, don't feel like it's not good. On the contrary, it shows that there's something that you're interested in.
You know what you're interested in, what you want.
Yeah.
And maybe being specific, maybe it can help like to link it to a bigger, not a bigger topic, but maybe something happening in the world, like for example, biomedical science can be linked to the pandemic that happened.
Yep.
That's what Isidore talked about. You, for example, was also the economic impact of COVID.
Yeah. So yeah, I did discuss COVID, and in general, in the personal statements, you want to show two things. One, you're good at this subject. Two, you're motivated and interested. For the second part of why you're motivated and interested, it often helps to have either personal stories or like talk about the news or the world environment for like economics, or as you said, for biomedical sciences, a specific field that's growing. But in general, yeah, that's my main advice for the personal statement, but it's not as important as other systems like the US or others, I'd say. For example, I was talking to my tutor last week, and because they are reviewing the applications for this year, and I asked him what they're looking at, and he told me that, at least for our course, 95% is your grade and your test score. And from there, you get into interview. And it's only essentially at interview time that they vaguely look at your personal statement, and still like 90% of the decision is made on your grades, your test, and your interview. So
the interview included, of course, because only 25%, I believe, in some courses, I'm not sure about economics management, get through that part.
Yeah, so you apply, a subsection of those who apply get into interview, and a subsection. Yeah. The stats depend on the courses. For economics and management, it's like 15 or 18, something like that. Get
into the step of the interview, and then
so like 100 people for economics and management. The stats are a bit different for each course. The economics and management is the one with the lowest stats, but 100 people apply. If 100 people apply, about 20 or 15 get interview, and from those 20 or 15, 5 or 6 get 5 get a spot. For other courses, some courses have like 60 or 80% interview rate, and admission rates will vary from 5% for economics and management or for computer science to 40 or 50% for some, but specific courses.
So could you provide us with some insights about these interviews that you had at Oxford? How did you prepare for them? What kind of questions you were asked?
My main experience was I was not tested on the things I prepared for. I had prepared a lot of things about the news, the macroeconomic environment, partly because I had vaguely mentioned it in my personal statement, but above all because I thought they would test my knowledge on the current economic situation. They never talked about that. I had 2 rounds of interviews, each interview with 2 people. So in total, 4 people interviewed me. Number 1 was on game theory. So it was a PhD person asking me about a theoretical game theory problem / game, and like trying to solve that, which was almost very similar to what some of my friends in computer science actually had, in that like you have a game and you have to solve it. That was number 1. Number 2 was on like general economic understanding of like principles of trade, and through specific contexts and case studies that she gave on the spot. Number 3 was on economics and business history. So they talked about Ford and like the car factories and that area of time, and a few questions on that. And number 4 was more for management, and I guess that was the management interview on, especially on leadership, strategy, and technology and operations. The main thing that they test is not how you do, how much you know, sorry, but rather how you think. The goal is to mimic vaguely what you would do in tutorials in Oxford, and it's to see not what you know, but rather how do you think. And if I present you with new information, if I challenge what you say, what's your approach to that, what's your attitude to that, in addition to like the standard stuff of how knowledgeable and I guess smart and interested and motivated you are. So yeah, the main thing was that I prepared content that I thought I would be tested on, and then I was never tested on that.
So now that you've been studying here for a year and you've become familiar with the tutorial system, could you give us an idea of how you're supposed to act? You said it's because for example, I imagine like the people that are interviewing are would be your future professors, your future tutors, and so is there a way to kind of reason? Maybe like you said, if you don't know the answer, you should show them kind of say out loud what you're thinking in order for them to guide you and help you. Yeah. Is that the way to do it?
That's spot on in terms of what you, in the interview, that's what you want to be doing. So showing how you think, showing that you're responsive to what they say, and giving a clear outline of your reasoning. For tutorials, once you're in the university, you'll have two things. You'll have lectures that are standard lectures, 100 people in a classroom, a professor talking, and then you'll have tutorials, which are 1, 2, or 3 students in a room with the professor for 1 hour or 2 hours. Some students in some courses have a third thing that's like classes, that's like around 10, or labs for science people. For STEM people, that's like 10 or 15 people, so it's some midpoint between the small scale tutorials and the big scale lectures. What you do in tutorials is often in the general structure of you have a piece of work that you do that for that week and that you do before the tutorial, and then over the tutorial you go over the homework / the subject theme of the week or something related, and that's where you essentially have 1 hour or 2 hours almost private class with a professor that knows you personally, that half of the people call by the professors by their first name, and if you, for that system, I'd say you get what you bring, or you get out of it what you put effort into, in the sense that by default it's a great system in that you have almost private classes. So if there's something you don't understand, you can have a professor explaining for 15 minutes to you on a personalized level the concept. So that's great, but also the more work you do before coming to the tutorial, the more, and exponentially, the more you will get out of it.
And how much time you would say you have to put in for example, preparing the tutorials and the courses and overlooking the lectures and doing independent work? Okay.
For each tutorial, you have a piece of work that takes you generally between 5 and 20 hours. It's a big range because it depends on the course, it depends on the professor, it depends on your ways of work. Yeah, generally, like, most pieces of work are between 5 and 20 hours. Assuming you have 2 or 3 subjects a term for which you have tutorials, you just multiply that by 2 or 3. And so as a general structure, your week will have about 5 to 10 hours of lectures for my course, and like 2 or 3 hours of tutorials and a couple of hours of classes for like 8 people. On average, the STEM classes have more class time, whereas the more humanity you go, the more independent work it's based on. So history people, for example, have like almost no class hours, and it's 100% personal reading and personal work. STEM people have a lot more classes and they have labs, etc. In terms of how much work per week, the thing is that you have a lot of free time, and the range, like I gave a big range for tutorial work, the range is even bigger. as a whole. Some people prepare each hour of lecture like 1 hour before and then review it for 3 hours after. Some people would just do 1 hour of work for 1 hour of lecture. The thing is, in general, with tutorials, you have a professor that you're in front of for an hour, like, and there's only 2 people in the room. So that system forces you to have done work, to like vaguely know what's going on, and especially to have done your homework properly. I think that's one of the main ways that the system like essentially forces you to, by default, even though you don't have many class hours, you have to do work. Final answer, hours per week of work can vary per person from 30 to 80 or 100. So yeah,
really
that's
depends.
not the satisfying answer, but that's the real answer.
It really depends. And in terms of classes, I was wondering what classes you can take. For example, it's your second year, so I imagine there's some kind of like modules you had the chance to choose, or like some specialization you're going to go into.
Yeah, so most programs in the university and all essentially in the UK as a whole will have the general structure of first year, generalist program, everyone does the same courses. Starting from second year, you choose the modules and specialties that you like. Like 90% of courses in the UK will be structured like that. My first year had essentially introduction to microeconomics, to macroeconomics, to management, to probability and statistics, and to finance. And then from there you choose what you're, for second year and third year, you choose what you're most interested in. I have gone I essentially like math and I hate essays, so I have chosen all the mathy economics modules, and I have very little management. My degree is now more like math and economics than management and economics and management, but I have friends who do like half, or some friends that even do more management than economics. So overall you have quite a bit of flexibility in the course, and you can make it what you want, I guess.
Okay, you have freedom to choose and to model it the way you want.
Like there's a general structure. Like you're studying, you don't have as much freedom as the US or some programs in Canada, for example,
liberal arts education.
where like you can have math and history double major with a minor in neuroscience. That you cannot do that in the UK. The UK system is based on you choose one course, you're kind of stuck with that, but that means you're doing it intensely and in a lot more depth, because you're only doing that for 3 years. It has the advantage of going into more depth. It has the disadvantage of not having the breadth that you have in the US. So you are like doing a subject, but you can choose, there's different paths and sub areas in that subject that you can choose.
And do you already have an idea of what your dream job maybe would be? You say it's very kind of, decisive. It's already very specialized, your education in the UK. Does this mean you already know what you want to do, or you think you can always, go into learn something else after your economics and management degree?
Short answer, I don't know exactly what my dream job is. The main path that people in the program take are either some form of masters, either in economics, and if I were to do that, I'd do like masters in math or computer science or statistics, something like that. In terms of private jobs, a lot of people go into either banking or consulting, or to a lesser extent tech, or like public service, government, policy type of work. But that often requires like master's or PhD before you go into that. Among those options, like all of them, I am in some way interested. So what's my dream job? I don't know. I'll tell you in 5 years. But yeah, the program opens a lot of doors. One thing with the UK, I'd say, and from talking to friends, it's also kind of true for the US, but not at all in France, is that your degree does not determine your job. In France, if you're like in prépa commerce or in business school, you're essentially like you have two areas to choose from. If you're in literature, again, you're like stuck on that route. Whereas in the UK and to some extent in the US, you have philosophy majors applying to banks and economics majors applying to like art stuff, I guess. And so like most employers will look at the university, like they'll be like, oh, he's at LSE, he's at Durham, he's at Oxford, and not care so much about what subject you are doing, which would never be true in France, for example.
For example, Boris Johnson, I think he did like classic studies at Oxford, and now he's doing politics.
I don't think the prime ministers are the perfect example, because there's one course called Philosophy, Politics and Economics that like half of the prime ministers did. But technically it's true, like Theresa May did geography here, Boris Johnson did classics here, Rishi Sunak did philosophy, politics and economics here. So there's breadth, but that specific example I don't think is the best one.
And to go back to, maybe your impressions of the school now that you've been here for a year, I was wondering what you think of the environment here, of the people, maybe some clubs or societies you're part of.
Yeah. General environment is great. The terms are structured in a way that I don't like, which is that you have 3 terms that are 8 weeks. So that's like 2 months. So the terms are very short and intense, and you have big breaks of like a month between the terms. The advantage of that is like everything is intense, so everything goes quickly, both academically and like outside of academics. The disadvantage is that you're only in town for half the year. On the academic side, it's great in the sense that, first of all, you have tutorials, but in general, you have a lot of accessibility to. You can easily reach out to your tutors. Your tutors see you every week for an hour. They know you personally. They know like personal stuff about you, and like you create a connection with them. And that also means that like they're super approachable because like they literally know you. In addition to that, you have a lot of opportunities, which is the true case for like a lot of universities. But you can always go to the lectures of other courses. There's a million talks or interesting people coming in. Yesterday there was McCarthy, the speaker of the ex-speaker of the House of Representatives, that was giving a talk. But then you also have like students, a million student societies that do their own stuff, and so you always have something to do. And especially since the terms are so short, you are super busy during the terms, but there's so many stuff available, and you have quite a bit of free time, not in the sense that you're not working, but in the sense that you can choose when you work, and so you can choose when you do other things, and there's a million things to choose from. On your question on what I'm doing, in terms of sports, I came in and I had done football and tennis, but I wanted to like try new sports when starting university. So I started volleyball and basketball, and I'm now this year captain for both teams for my college. In terms of other societies, there's literally stuff for anyone. There's from manga society to diplomacy society to debating society to economic society to some business societies. I would say in my first year I tried out a lot, from physics society, chess society, some of the economics ones. I tried some of the business ones. I went to some of the math sessions. I tried a few sports, etc. And then like you pick and choose the ones you like, and you take positions of responsibility in those. But what I'd say is there's stuff for everyone, which is great.
In terms of, for example, the living situation, do you still live on campus, even since it's your second year, I imagine?
Yeah. 95% of students have housing arranged in some way. Every housing situation is arranged by your individual college. there's 40 colleges, so there's 40 individual situations. In 95% of cases, whatever college you have will arrange you dorms, and you have to pay for them, but you don't have to worry about finding an apartment like the people in London, for example, would have to do. Hartford College situation is you live on main site, so in the central part of the city for the first year, and then in second year and third year you live in secondary accommodations that are a bit further. And then that depends on every college. Big colleges that have a lot of space will have everyone on main site, but most colleges have like a main site and some secondary accommodation. Yeah, an annex in
so
another place.
So is that where you're living right now?
Yeah, I'm living in an annex.
I think I passed it like when I was going back. I saw the Hartford College annex. Yeah, and it was like near where I'm staying.
Exactly. So most people have accommodation arranged.
Yeah. And it takes a little bit more time to go to classes, but I imagine second year. But
yeah, it's like 15 minutes walk. But the thing with the campus is, first of all, there's no campus, like no closed campus as you would have for other universities. Like the city is the campus and is merged, which is quite fun, I think, because it's like there's no borders to the university. And then secondly, like everything is 15-minute walk from the center. So like if you have to go from one extreme to the other, I guess it's like half an hour, but especially if you have bike, everything is 5 minutes walk.
And to go back to your time at EGM, even though we kind of emphasize that the extracurriculars aren't as important in the UK application, like you said, like 95% interview, personal statement, and the additional exam, you still did a lot of activities at school, in high school, and I think it would be interesting to see how this impacted your experience overall. Course. And so, for example, you were selected to participate in a workshop held every 2 weeks with ENS, so the neuroscience researcher and professor, Shiab Shama.
Yeah.
So could you tell us about this experience, what your role was and what activities this involved?
Of course. I don't remember the name of the program at EJM. I think it was like something for high performing students. I don't remember the name. But essentially you had this professor from ENS Paris that did neuroscience, and he would have this workshop. Every 2 weeks he'd give like a 2-hour workshop, which was essentially some form of lecture with then some interactions at the end, where he would present the basics of neuroscience and then the basics of his own individual research. The format was quite simple, that you'd go every 2 weeks, you'd attend the lectures, and there would be some form of interaction /session /Q&A at the end. And like that, although I did not choose neuroscience as a path, I think that was super interesting. In that the school offered it, and that the professor was really nice, and so like I learned a lot from that. So that was really cool.
Was that like in the 2 last years of high school or earlier?
I think it was around seconde or première, like a couple of years before graduating, I think.
Okay, and at the time were you considering to do neuroscience, to study this?
I was always interested in some areas of science, ranging from neuroscience to like on the physics side, but both my parents are in academia. My dad, for example, does geology, and so I know vaguely what academia looks like, and from that I know that I don't want to go into it. The main reason being that you have an interesting subject that you're passionate about and that you want to spend your life researching, which that attracted me a lot. The problem with academia is that you have so many problems with financing, with like the internal politics of academia, with getting approval for your project, etc. All of this means that you spend, depending on the field you're in your position, you spend 70 to 95% of your time doing administration or all that stuff, and then you spend a fraction of your time on the research you're actually passionate about. And so that's why, like, although I was interested in like a few fields in science, and I was like a more of a mathy STEM person, I guess, I didn't want to go into that.
And by academia, you mean research or teaching at a university?
Both.
It's really
research, teaching. I did my stage de troisième, so like work experience in an oceanographic institute in the south, and like they're essentially the ones doing the submarines that then marine biologists or marine geologists use in their work. And so also on the engineering side, it's the same point of you have something that you're passionate about and you want to make it your job, but you end up spending 80% of your time on other stuff.
And for some activities that you founded, so for example, the Olympiad Math Club that you founded in our school, I was wondering, how this worked, if it's still around in our school, if we can join it, how, the club's activities worked, and what kind of Olympiads you did.
Yeah, so I liked math as a kid, but there was no, at the time I was there was no structure or like club in place for people who want to do math beyond like the school curriculum. There were some things in like your première or terminale that were in place for preparing the concours généraux or some like university prep, but there was nothing like before that. So I essentially went to the directors and the math professors to try to set that up. Essentially in our first year we had around 7 students, 1 professor, weekly sessions where we would go over either past problems of Olympiads or he would just explain and teach concepts. That was super cool. The professor was extremely nice. He unfortunately left after 1 year. He left the school, but we then continued that like with another professor. And yeah, over time, the general we had about 20 to 25 like recurring members and about 35, 40-ish people that have at some point come by to try it out. The general structure was a professor, depending on the sessions, but either going through past problems or teaching new like theory or content to everyone.
It was a really cool idea, and it's really nice for the teachers to do this. If you don't mind mentioning it, even the
professor
of
course.
Who left.
The professor we started it with was called Mr. Berge. After this, we had Madame Calvo helping us, as well as in some way Madame Coursager and Dachelet and Chauveau contributing in some way. A lot of the people from there prepared for the Préparation Olympique Française de Mathématiques, so Math Olympiads, essentially. I qualified for that like 2 or 3 times, which was a great experience. The club still exists, to answer your previous question. It has changed hands and therefore it has changed names and structure. I think the year below us have a similar thing that they called Sostomat, which is a bit different, but that I guess that's the legacy. So it's changed structure over the years, but it seems to still exist.
The idea was there, yeah. And you also co-founded what is called Call to Solidarity. Could you tell us a little bit about this organization, what it's about?
Yeah. So Call of Solidarity, or in French, L'Appel Solidaire, was a charity 2 friends and me co-founded during COVID. So the situation is March 2020, lockdown is announced. There were a lot of reports of isolation and psychological isolation in society as a whole, but in particular among the elderly, for the main reason being that you and me can just FaceTime our friends or talk to them on Instagram, which is not a habit that the elderly have. So they were like more disconnected from others than the younger generations. That meant that, especially in nursing homes, where because of lockdown they couldn't see their family, there was a big problem of isolation. So with those 2 friends, what we did was, over time, we recruited about 65 volunteers, and we collaborated with 6 nursing homes, and the volunteers would have weekly calls with some of the residents of the nursing homes. We also collected sometimes drawings to send the people or letters to send to the residents. And yeah, over that, we run that for about 2 years. until essentially COVID ended and we all went to university, and that was a great experience.
For example, leadership experiences that you had that might have been useful for your management degree now. You were a class delegate in 2020, 2021. I was wondering, what projects you undertook during those years. How was your experience?
Yeah, I was delegate for in high school, essentially. Main projects, the gist of the work as delegate is not based on projects, but on continuous stuff of continuously talking to the professors, keeping exchanges with your directors. So most of the work is irregular small things rather than big projects. Some of the things I did was for the French baccalaureate, I created this huge mega Google Drive folder that everyone would contribute to. And essentially, that was the drive that every single person in in our class used to prepare for the bac. So we have this huge folder. That was probably one of the main things. Then there's organizing small events, reporting problems. If people have problems and you have to defend them, or to defend their positions in committees or meetings, that's also stuff you have to do.
Yeah, communicate with the teachers, with the administration. And through all of your years at École Emmanuel, who was your favorite teacher?
There isn't one favorite teacher. Yeah. So I've had what I liked about EJM is that I've met a lot of teachers across my years that I really liked and that took the time to teach me things and be nice. Some examples include, but this is not an exhaustive list, I had Madame M. Foucault that did economics, that had Madame Coursaget that did math, Madame Deschlet and Madame Chauveau that also did math, Monsieur Berge that also did math, Monsieur Auquier, who's the director for the French section and a French teacher, Mr. Mai, who was a history teacher, Mr. Juan Thomas in Spanish, who was a great teacher. There's a million ones. I could go for 5 minutes, but yeah, there's a lot.
And since you've had already different experiences in life, going to university, embarking on this new journey, what would you say are the advantages that you've gained through your education at École Emmanuel that you can see now playing out in your life?
Main advantage, I'd say if you look at the French environment and the main points of comparison or alternatives being schools like Henri IV, Le Grand, or the more traditional Catholic ones, number one, by far, biggest advantage is the languages, and the simple fact that you can speak perfect English and that every student in EGM presumably has perfect English. That's by far the biggest difference and the biggest advantage that people have in life, that you realize when you're in France, but above all, once you leave France and you see people from France who don't have as good of French, you need to have perfect English to live outside of France, which seems obvious, but people from other school don't have as good English. In general, also the languages, you have more exposure to languages, which is great, and I think that's the strength of EJM. We're less good, our math curriculum goes less deep than Stanislas or Louis Le Grand, but we can talk more languages. I guess that's the trade-off that we have. Other resources, other advantages are that a lot of people go to other countries, so you have exposure, you have friends going to the US, to the UK, to Amsterdam, to Spain, staying in France. So you have a lot of exposure from two different people going to different paths, and you don't have just everyone going to prépa or law or medicine in France. You have some, but not everyone. I think that's the two main advantages, but by far languages are the biggest.
And what languages do you speak?
I can speak French, Spanish, Hebrew, English, a tiny bit of Chinese, but I wouldn't count that properly. But I'm trying to improve it, and I can vaguely understand Catalan, but not speak it myself.
And do you have advice to our graduates that are like you, who are embarking on this new journey, who are finishing, senior year? In terms of
last year high school students?
Yeah, in terms of life, academics, or just in general.
Big question. Let's do by theme. Academics. First of all, listen in class, and every minute of work you do in class is worth 10 minutes of work at home. Especially for like the people who think that they work a lot at home but still have difficulties. I think the problem is not in the work done at home, it's in the work done in the classroom. Then it's like cliche general advice of like be respectful and nice to your teacher, which seems obvious, but half of the people don't do it. And if you just genuinely listen in class and are nice to your teachers and respect them and ask them questions, which seems obvious, but if you just do those 3 things consistently, you're automatically top 3 students in your class. And just from there, like, pursue what you're interested in. There will be pressure to do some things. I think in general, follow what you want, but also like listen to what others say. One mistake I did, for example, was my specialties were math, economics, and physical chemistry. I think even though I went the economics route, I think I should have kept physics rather than economics. The main reason being that physics opens, like for example, for scientific prepas, you essentially needed physics to apply. I got into some without that, but in general, you want to have physics, whereas no one requires economics. So be mindful, especially when you choose your subjects, whether IB or not, that some subjects open doors and some subjects not having them means that you can't access some doors. But beyond that, choose what you're interested in and be mindful of that. Life advice, there's more to life than universities/school, I guess. Do worry about school as your priority, but try to do cool stuff outside and to not just do activities just for the sake of having one line on your application. A lot of students do that, and I understand why, because you have a university system that encourages you to do a lot of small things you don't care about just so you can mention it in your Common App essay or whatever. If you want to do that, then do that, that's fine, but also have stuff that you actually like in your free time.
And last question, what is your definition of success?
I don't know exactly how I define success. Main ideas that come to mind are, one, something that generally makes you happy and satisfied with what you're doing, which is a very cliche answer, but there's many different ways to pursue an interest you have or to change the world at your scale in whatever way you want to do it. Success is you having found a way to pursue what you're interested in, what impact you want to have, in a way that matches your individual situation. That means that for every individual, there will be a different thing they're interested in, a different impact they want to have, and a different way they will achieve that thing they want to do or the thing they want to impact. But if you have those 3 for each individual, I think that's how I would look at success.
Well, thank you very much, Daniel, for sharing your story. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much for having taken the time.
Thank you. Awesome. Perfect. Great.
Cool.
Thank you for tuning in on this episode of the Anxious Scholar podcast. See you in 2 weeks for the next interview, and don't miss out on any additional information on our Instagram @The Anxious Scholar.